Hi everyone. Today we have with us a very special guest on the Mentality, IELTS coach and influencer from the US, and who has been working and living here in India for a while. So I hope I've got your brief introduction correct. And if I've left out something, please go right ahead. Yeah.
No, yeah. So I have a language school here in Dehradun. We teach English and foreign languages, but then I specifically teach IELTS here, and have been sharing a lot of that on Instagram
Yes.
in the last
Yes.
6 months.
And I have to give it to you that I've been watching a few of your reels and all of that, and it's been very, very interesting and very creative and real fun. Yeah, and kudos to you. Yeah, great job.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I try to keep it fun. I know nobody gets on Instagram thinking, "Oh, I'd like to have homework or some kind of lesson," right?
Right.
So it's kind of like a 90% entertaining, fun, and
Oh,
10%, oh, I didn't know that.
sure. What inspired you to, become an IELTS coach, and how did you end up working in India? Yeah.
Yeah, so I trying to think of how far to go back. So I am originally from the US, and was real fortunate to work in finance and made enough money where basically I had enough in my retirement account so that I couldn't retire, but I didn't have to worry about retirement because by the time I'm ready to retire, that will be taken care of. And
Sure.
so it was kind of a life-changing realization for me that, like, okay, so for the next 40 years, I need to make enough to feed myself.
Okay.
And that's it. And like everything else is, I can create whatever life I want, right?
Sure. Sure.
And so, like, I know I'm going to retire well. And then anything else I want to do, if I want to go camping or if I want to go like climb Mount Everest or if I want to go like anything, all these
Retirement from
possibilities.
what? What were you doing previously?
I was working in finance.
Finance, right? Okay. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So it
The banking system in the US. And
right,
so I thought, like, well, like, a lot of the luck that has happened in my life came because people invested in me, people who didn't owe me anything, people who were not my family,
right,
people came and they invested in me for no other reason than they wanted to see someone succeed.
right,
And so
right,
I thought, like, I would love to be able to do this for somebody else. And so
right.
I looked around for different opportunities. I ended up spending a couple of years in Brazil.
Oh,
Um,
lovely. Right,
and there in Brazil, I was working with an organization. We worked with refugees that were coming into the country, especially from the Syrian war. And so I did that for a couple of years, and that's where I met my wife, who is Brazilian. There's a big difference between being a foreigner in a country and being a foreigner in a country who's married to a local,
right,
because foreigners, we make the dumbest mistakes. One of the things that I did was the biggest airport there in Brazil is called São Paulo Guarulhos, and so
okay,
I had been asked to buy a ticket for this girl who was coming in for our wedding, and so my wife said, "Can you buy her a bus ticket?" So I bought her a ticket for Guarulhos, and then on her way back, the girl calls and says, "They just dropped me off in the middle of some city." And I
right,
was like, I bought, and she said, "What, where did you buy the ticket for?" And I said,
right,
I bought it for Guarulhos. And she said, "You bought it for Guarulhos or you bought it for São Paulo Guarulhos, the airport?" I
right,
said, wait, wait, wait. Guarulhos is a city. I had
right,
no idea because Sao Paulo is this enormous city and Guarulhos
right,
is this tiny little city where the airport happens to be.
right,
And so
right,
I was thinking, kind of like, you fly into New York, you fly into New York, JFK or LaGuardia. These are not cities, these are the names of the airports, that it's New
right,
York, JFK. There is no JFK city, right?
right, right,
That I thought this was the name of the airport, but it's not. And I had sent her, to the city center and not to the airport. And so, like, these are the kind of mistakes that we make. And so I was like, I kind of don't want to live here now that I'm married to somebody because I'm always behind her.
right,
And then she kind of had the same feeling about living in the US, that, okay, we can go to the US, but now I'm going to always be kind of behind my husband. And so we decided, okay, we can't both, be on firm ground together. So let's go kind of together, be on our back foot. And so that's when we started looking for different places. We got interested in India. And so we actually were brought here specifically to Dehradun because of this language school. So this language school where that I now own, Heritage Institute of Languages, so really has a reputation as the best Hindi school in the country. And there's some obvious reasons behind that, but that's what brought us here initially was, okay, we were thinking about staying in India, so we need to learn the language first.
Sure.
And so
Right.
we came here to learn the language, and so that's how we ended
How
up
many
here.
years back was this?
This was at the end of 2017.
So okay, not too far, like about 6 years, 6
Yeah,
years.
five and a half years now.
Right, right. Okay, okay. So, and what specifically you could have gone to a place like a bigger city like Delhi, Gurgaon, Bombay, Bangalore, too many. So, what specifically drew you to a place like Dehradun?
Yeah. So again, the thing that brought us here was the school. We were looking to learn the language, and then our thought was, from here we can go anywhere, right? Or we
Sure.
can go anywhere that's Hindi speaking, because we kind of thought like, it's hard when you're coming into a new country like India. I tell people, when we go home, it's not a country the way that we think of a country,
Right, right.
because it's not just different. Because any big country, a lot of people don't know this. We have India and China, which are the biggest population wise. What's the third largest? Do you know? What's the third largest population in the world?
US?
It's the US. Even Americans don't know this because we're so much further down that it really doesn't matter,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That we're just one of
Close
the
to
other big
350, 330,
countries.
350 million, if I'm
Yeah,
right.
330. And
Yeah,
so it's us, Indonesia, Brazil, there's lots of countries that are kind of in this big, but not India, China big, right?
right, right,
And so, yeah, so, but in those big countries, of course, you have a mix of cultures, especially somewhere like the US or Brazil, where it was actually populated by different countries. But I said, the thing is, like, there's still like different people groups here. There's
right,
still, because of kind of the cultural systems, they haven't mixed in the same way that we do in the US. They haven't, because there's still language barriers within the country.
right.
There's just a lot more preservation of these different cultures, which can be a challenge and which can be really cool.
Sure,
But that we had to decide from the beginning, okay, where do we want to gamble that will be a good place, because you don't know
sure,
until you get there, right? And so
sure.
we kind of bet on Hindi, in that, is the number one spoken language. It gave us the most options,
Right,
knowing that, we may end up here and then say, all right, well, now we have to learn, Bengali or something, or Punjabi, because turns
right,
out that's not where we ended up.
right.
Uh, but yeah, so we came here, and but I do like to push back on this idea, because I don't know. Sometimes I think that people have a lack of imagination, because so many people ask me, why Dehradun when you could have gone to, for example,
Precisely, yeah.
Mumbai,
Better
right?
opportunities,
And
bigger cities, and all of that. Yeah, it makes sense.
right. And so my thing is, I was very privileged, because I was able to make a lot of money at a young age,
Right,
but there's more to life than opportunities, right?
right,
And I sometimes it feels very, I don't know, it feels like a big poverty mindset that we've never let go of from a
right,
lot of people. Because
right,
when you're in poverty, of course you're constantly thinking of, where do I get my next rupee, right?
right,
Because it's how do you eat? It's
right,
how do you afford medical care,
right,
But there has to come a point in our lives where we say, wait, why am I worried so much about money? Right?
right,
Because money, the whole idea is it should improve your life.
right,
But I see people who are ruining their lives. They're going to Delhi, they're
right.
breathing air that's going to eventually kill them, right?
True.
And for what? Like, to get a little bit extra money that then you have to spend on more costly rent. Like, I don't understand that
And
trade-off,
you use that money to pay your medical bills, perhaps.
Right. And so that's the thing, is like, to me, the salary is not the biggest thing. It's, what's the kind of life I can create? And of
Right,
course, why am I here and not up in the mountains? Well, because up in the mountains, it would be difficult to have enough money to just sustain, right?
right,
So it's not that money is not important. I'm not a Jeff Bezos who can just not worry about it.
right,
But there is a trade-off. And
right,
and part of it is, I come from a very small town in Texas.
right.
The population sign still says 700, although
Okay.
it's not accurate, because I left, so now there's only 699 of us left, right? And so it's, I mean, a very small place. And so, that was always more comfortable to me. And
Right.
so, especially the amount of noise and just crowds in some of the bigger cities, it's tough for me.
So
So
you yourself are a proud small towner. Like
yes,
I'm
I
also
came
from
from a
Dehradun.
very
So
small place.
yeah. So where I was coming from is because when people transition and move to a different country altogether, they have certain misconceptions and preconceived notions about the culture, about people, and and especially for someone like you who's coming to make a life for yourself, and settle down and work for some years here. So it's a big decision. So what were your preconceived notions about India, or Dehradun perhaps, that before you eventually decided that you want to stay and work here?
I'll stick to the ones that turned out to be wrong, because I had a lot of ideas. I think the biggest one that is, even if you know that it's there, it's just hard to imagine all the ways that it plays out. But it's that your values, number one, will necessarily exist there.
Right.
And number two, that even if they do exist, that they may show up in a very different way. The way that they're kind of fleshed out could be very different. And I'll give you an example. For example, for both our cultures, and my wife's culture in Brazil too, we have this idea that you should respect older people, right? The older people, especially in your family.
Right.
But how that is played out is
Right.
very different.
Sure.
So for us, that means that we take care of things. We may end up using some of our income eventually to subsidize their care, because medical expenses can be very, very high. Especially, my great grandparents all lived to the age of 100, and so that means they're still going for a very long time, even as the medical bills get higher and higher. And so it can be that. It can be, you just you make sure that they're at the head of the table. If they've said that something is important to them at a holiday, then we make sure that we have that, and that's an experience for them. And so you come to India, and some of those things carry over, but then like the thing that I immediately see is, therefore, for example, the older people in your life have control of your life, and if they say that something about the job or where you should stay or who you should marry, even the people who end up going against that, that's a really hard thing to do. Whereas in my culture, that's just not part of how we respect people. And so if an older person, if one of the older people in my family said something like this, I would just kind of look at them and be like, who do you think you are? Right. That's out of bounds. It's not your life. Your job is to give counsel, and I can come to you, but you don't make these decisions. And so seeing how, like, okay, both of these cultures are showing a way that they respect their elders, but it's very different. And then, again, I see people here who will cut in line in front of an older woman, and they just don't care. And I'm like, this would never happen in my culture because that's a big deal for us. Whereas here, we cut in line, whatever, right? And so you just see these things playing out where, a lot of Indians would see how we, can disregard what our parents or grandparents think and think, wow, that's really disrespectful, right? And then we see, the way that people sometimes treat people out in the market. We think, oh my God, that's really disrespectful. And so you have to learn this thing of, for them, they're not connecting those two things, right? It's not about respect. It's just, this is how things are. And I always say, culture is that point at which you can no longer defend it, and you just have to say, it's the way we do it.
Right.
And so, because there are things, whether it's, equality or where it's like, look, no, there's right and there's wrong.
Right.
And if your culture doesn't respect those things, you just say, well, it's my culture. And it means, okay, you can't defend it any further than this, And there's a lot of things where people ask me, why do Americans do this? And it's like, culture, man. Like, I can't defend it. It's just, we do that thing, and sorry for that.
Yeah, but you know what? A couple of things where when I speak to a lot of friends of mine here, and we discuss about the American culture, because American culture it's an amalgamation of different cultures. It's an Italian culture, it's a French culture, it's a British culture, because people have been coming to the United States for a few hundred years and eventually settling down and all that. It's an amalgamation of cultures of sorts. So the Chinese culture, Indian culture, and it's an influence where you have the people from different cultures coming together, having a good time, and you're learning from each other and all of that. So it's very, very diverse in terms of very similar to what India has different cultures, different dialects, and all, extremely diverse. So do you think that when people talk about the American culture, are we talking about something very, very specific, like somebody who's not white, for instance? Is it same for them, or probably a Chinese person, a Chinese descent person who's come to the US and he's been living there for about 30, 40 years and all of that. Uh, and he's adapted to the culture. He's born there, or probably not even born there. Perhaps he's been staying there for a considerable period of time, say about 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and adapted to the culture. So is it same as to what you find here when you travel or meet with people, or like what have you perceived about Indian culture? Sort of similar to the American culture.
Yeah, so I think the there's a few really, really big differences. One is, it's in actually the name of our school, which is Heritage. Like we don't have a really deep heritage in the US because we're almost everyone is immigrants, right?
Right.
You look at my skin and you can see I am an immigrant to the country
Sure.
because the indigenous people, they don't look like this. And so that immigrant experience is part of it, but really the American culture is formed not necessarily around like this, ancient history like it is in what we call the old world, right? Here and the rest of Asia and Europe and Africa. Like you have people who could be living in the same place that
Sure.
they're, great, 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 17th generation. Well, nobody's like that in the US.
Yeah.
That's not our thing. And so instead we have these ideals that we kind of rally around.
Sure.
And so it's these ideas of equality. It's these ideas of, that anybody can make it, that it doesn't matter, that it doesn't matter what family you were born into. That's irrelevant.
Right.
And that it doesn't matter if you are, high status, you can end up as a street cleaner, and it doesn't matter if you're low status, you can end up as a president. And so like that's like a very something we really hold tight to. And I
Right.
think a lot of the stuff that you hear of these criticisms of America is because obviously we fail at that a lot, right?
Sure.
And so you have these people who grew up believing in things, and then they see kind of the limits of that, that, okay, fine, some people are able to make it, but not everybody.
Sure.
And, of course, someone who grows up in a really wealthy family is going to have advantages over someone who didn't.
Sure.
And
Sure.
that if I put in the exact same effort that somebody who came from a really poor family and somebody who came from an extremely wealthy family, that our results are likely going to be different, right?
Sure. Sure.
And so I think there is some frustration that happens when people see that is the case. And, some people think that the US is going to be heaven on earth. It's not, it's just another place. But it is a place that does celebrate other cultures. It is a place that, I even in my little city of 700. So when I was in school, we had 3 or 4, depending on the time, different international students studying in my grade. And so like even in the tiniest places, there is international influence. And so for us, in fact, it's something that I have to talk to our Western, especially American, Canadian, and English students when they come. We have this understanding that, oh, other cultures are interesting. I want to know everything I can about them.
Right.
And not everyone here is that way.
Right.
And so, for example, in our classes, a lot of the times we will want to relate our experiences with
Right.
the assumption that you're interested in how we do things differently,
Right.
because we're interested in how this difference works, right?
Right.
The way that a classroom functions differently, the way that holiday celebrations
Sure.
function differently, the way that weddings work, right? And
Right.
so we're really interested in that, and
Right.
not everybody here is. And
Right.
so they don't understand that a lot of people are here when they tell you about it. They may just be really proud of the way that they do it,
Right.
and
Right.
they're not interested in hearing about you,
Right.
right? And so when we then go and start sharing our experience, thinking, oh, this is this cool exchange, sometimes people get frustrated because what they hear is, oh, you just told me how you do it. Let me tell you how my way is better.
Right.
And when that's not our thought process, but it can
Right.
be
Right.
perceived that way. And
Right.
so yeah, there's just limits to how much,
Right.
just that cultural expectation is
Right.
of how interested am I supposed to be in you, right?
Right.
And so I think that is an easier thing for people going. It makes sense, right? If you're
Right.
going to go become a baker, If you go to the bakery that's constantly hiring new people and turning them into bakers, that's going to be an easier experience than even if you go to a place that's a better bakery, right? But
Sure.
hasn't hired anybody in 10 years. Then
Sure.
obviously it's going to be an easier experience because they know all the things you go through. They know the mistakes you're going to make. They're ready to deal with it. Whereas you're kind of on your own in the other place. And I think that a lot of that's a shock for people that come here, especially from a country like the US, because we grew
Right.
up helping immigrants through that.
Right.
And then we get here and we do not get the exact same care because of course people aren't ready. They don't know how to do that, right? They're not experienced in it. And I tell people, the easiest way to see this is when I go to Delhi,
Right.
where they are used to having foreigners, right? They see foreigners kind of around all the time.
Right.
People are blown away by my Hindi, right? Because they're used to
I'm
seeing
sure.
foreigners and they know foreigners don't speak Hindi, right?
Right.
Whereas then if I go up into some of these small towns around Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh,
Right.
they're like, why can't you speak?
Uh,
Right? Because they're not used to foreigners at all. And they don't understand why it's so difficult to learn this language. Right. And so it's funny because you would think, oh, these people who've never seen a foreigner, they're going to be so excited that I can speak. No, they're not impressed because they don't know that it's difficult to learn a language that you didn't speak since you were a child, you know?
right.
And so a lot of these expectations are it just doesn't play out the way that you thought. And so that can be a challenge.
No, because a lot of times I have in fact bumped into a couple of people in. So I keep on dabbling between Dehradun and Bombay. I did meet a lot of people from the US and all of that. So when I was having this conversation with them with regards to cultures and how like what we've discussed right now. Say for instance, in India, what I have felt that we are too influenced and aware of what's actually happening in the US, whereas in the US, people are a bit more insulated. They have a insulated culture. So, like if I'm say for instance, I'm an American and I'm staying in Florida, so my
Mhm.
worldview is only limited to Florida and what's happening in perhaps just the United States. People who are staying in the US aren't too aware of what's actually happening outside of their countries, and they need to be a bit more aware of, say, what's going on in the UK, France, China, India, whatever. So, do you think that that happens?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to push back on this a little bit. All right. So, because you're absolutely right that Indians know a lot more about like the everyday comings and goings in the U.S. than Americans do about India. That is absolutely true. But I'm kind of in a unique position because again, my wife is from Brazil.
Sure.
Tell me all the things you know about Brazilian politics.
The BRICS, yes,
Okay, this is a perfect example. So
yeah,
you know what affects you, right? Because
right,
you're talking about BRICS because that's Brazil and India, right? Brazil, Russia,
right.
and China. So
India, China, Russia,
the
South Africa. Yeah,
so the reality is every country you go to, right? Because I've done the same thing to Brazilians because Brazilians will say, well, Brazil knows about the US, but the US doesn't know about Brazil. And I'll say, okay, tell me everything you know about India. And they're like, I say, no, 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 because you care about the stuff that affects you, right? We
right.
didn't know that much about it, China, but now China is a more and more of a power. And so, of
Yeah,
course, Americans know more about China now than they did 25 years ago
sure.
because it affects us a lot more than it used to.
Right,
And it's the same thing, as Africa becomes more of a player on the world stage, and people are learning more about India because the India is coming into its own and it's becoming one of these countries, with the BRICS countries that is more of a global player, and so they're learning more, but the reality is, I always think people know about what affects them. And so you have these weird people that are just into it because it's interesting, but there's not that many people who are watching a UN assembly about a thing that they, will never touch their shore, right? There's not that many people who are doing these things about different fertilizers that are being used in Africa because it just doesn't affect me. So it's not interesting, right?
right,
And
right.
so as this huge global player, the largest economy in the world, the largest military in the world, the US gets involved in everything. A lot of times we shouldn't be involved, but we are. And
Yeah,
so, of course, everybody knows about the US. But the reality is, most people don't know that much about Spain. Most people, people know about the countries that are making things, making big effects, whether that's good or bad. They know
right.
about the ones that affect their own country. And so, as you get over here, people know a lot more about China because it affects us.
Right.
right? You ask an American, tell me 10 things about Pakistan. We can't do it, man,
Right.
because Pakistan just is not a player in our world.
Sure.
We
Sure.
know it's kind of this, it's a difficult country to deal with, and that's about it.
Right.
Whereas you ask Indians to tell you 10 things and you'll have to tell them to shut up. You say, no, you've already given me 30. Stop, stop, stop. Right. And
Right.
so I think that's what happens is, of course, Indians know about the US because, for better or worse, the US ends up affecting everybody.
Sure.
But and a lot of Americans, what stuff can they tell you about India? They can tell you about Diwali. They can tell you about taking your shoes off when you come in an Indian's home. They can tell you about, some of the flavors that they've had. Why? Because this is the stuff that we've learned from our Indian neighbors, because that affects us, right? We have a connection to them. We don't
Right.
have a connection to BJP, Congress, Rahul Gandhi, uh, Modi. Like these don't affect us, but we know Indians, and so that's the stuff we know about India is what
Sure.
we know from our neighbors.
Sure, sure. So, like when you're staying, when you were back home, and were you exposed to Indian culture, Indian people, and before you landed up here, or was it that you had to do your own due diligence as far as your research was concerned about India and the Indian culture and all of that?
Yeah. So the again, it's a country of immigrants. So someone from Russia, people from China, people from India. But
Sure,
because it's like that, it's not a novelty. You don't look and say, "Oh, there's a guy from China." It's like, "Oh, yeah, okay." It would be like somebody freaking out because there's someone from Bihar. Like, okay, it's not here, but like I'm not going to freak out, right?
sure,
So we definitely are exposed to Indians, but we're exposed to everybody, and
yes,
so it's not really a big novelty. And the other thing is, again, I don't know what it's like to be 30 years old in the U.S.
mm,
because I've been gone from there for 8 years now. Um, but especially as a young person, the people I knew either were born in the US, so they were Americans,
right,
or they came over very young. And so
right,
obviously the guys that I was friends with, their perspective is a little different than
right,
somebody who moves when they're 20, right?
right.
Um, and so uh, yeah, there's not a ton of exposure. You just know your friends. And it's one of these things where like sometimes I let people just believe that some of the things I do that are weird, they're like, "Oh, it's like an American thing, right?" And I'm like, yeah, yeah, it's an American thing where like
Sure,
they'll excuse my bad behavior in something. And so it's that thing where it's hard to untangle sometimes, what is Raj, right, who's a friend of mine, and what is Indian culture? I don't know. I just know this guy who is Indian, and I know there's some weird things about him. And it's not until you come here and you say, "Oh, these people do stuff like Raj, so that was Indian." And nope, nobody else does this. Raj was just weird about this, right?
sure.
So you never do know.
So, this is something that I had been wanting to ask you. What are the major differences in the education system of the US and India? What's something that we could probably learn from the American education system, or vice versa? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think they seem to be set up almost exactly opposed to each other.
Okay.
And so my experience in the Indian culture, is it's about absorbing and recalling information,
Right.
right? Um, and we can talk later about like my concerns about that, because man, as like Chat GPT gets really good at that, like how
Sure.
much do we need an education system, right? When we've
Right.
got that ability. But in in my education system, man, that I always refer to different types of learning as muscles. That's a muscle we don't work out.
Right.
And so you see a lot of people get into med school, get into programming languages and stuff, and they struggle. We have this thing. It's like drinking from a fire hose. I don't know if you've ever seen
Right.
like the fire hoses that we have in the U.S. that are like so much water. And it's like if you try to put that in your mouth and just your mouth, you can't drink it fast enough,
Sure.
right? And it just is washing over you. And so that's the idea of like med school is really hard because as Americans, we weren't taught to absorb this much information and
Right,
be able to
because the
recall.
only sorry to cut you short. The only reason that I asked you is because in India we believe that the Indian education system is more theoretical, less practical. Vis-a-vis in the US, it's I won't say a balance, but there's more practical and less theory. Is that correct?
Definitely. So what do, like, right? It's not like we just go to school and do nothing, right? So we're not doing this. So what are we doing? And so in that case, we're more on the side of critical thinking, problem solving, right? And so to give you an idea, when one of those things we struggle with here in the school, because we do more Western concepts, and you'll understand what that means in a minute, but that each thing I teach you, I don't need you to memorize that thing.
Right.
I need you to understand this thing so that it's another tool that you have for the rest of your life that you can use. It's another concept that you can apply to different situations. And we want to both teach you how this concept works and when and how to apply it, right? And so it's not about, teach me what a hammer is and I will learn all the facts about a hammer. It's like, no, get it in your hands and swing it, right? And see how it works. And, oh, look, the back, you can pull nails out, see how that works. That's kind of how we think. And so you'll notice when you're talking to someone from the West and from a Western education system, we use lots of examples, right? Because if I give you a theoretical thing and I don't care that you memorize what I've said, and I really just want you to understand it, I need you to see how this gets applied in different ways, right? And so we do the same thing in our classrooms. We use a lot of what we call CCQs, which is comprehension checking questions, right? Because we want to make sure that you understand what I just said. And let me give you a big thing that kind of makes people's brains melt on both sides, which is here in India, a lot of times, if you write down the right answer, but you didn't word it exactly the way that it was supposed to be worded, they'll count it wrong, right?
They'll probably cut some marks or something. I mean, deduct a few marks or whatever. Yeah, you're right.
So in my system, if you write it exactly the way that it was in the book, they'll mark it wrong because they will say, you memorize this, you don't understand it.
Okay.
Because if you understand it, it should be much easier.
Perspective to it, right? In your own way.
Yeah, because if I say, the way that we use a hammer, basically there's one end and it's big and it's flat, and we use that to pound the nails. You have the other side has these little prongs, and we use those, and you can hook a nail in it and pull it out. So that shows I know how to use a hammer. But if I just memorize text about a hammer, maybe I know how to use a hammer, maybe I don't, right? Maybe I just memorize some text. And so that's why they will not allow you to give an exact thing. They want you to put it in your own words to show me, right? That's why in our education, there's a lot of essay writing. Show me you understand. Show me, apply this to a new situation. Apply this in a different way. And so that's the idea. And we use that a lot because, we think of language learning as very different from, maths. Because maths, you can just learn it, right? You can sit in the back of the class and you can learn it. Whereas language is a lot more like learning a sport. And I can sit here and explain to you how to bowl a Yorker that will get even Virat Kohli to take his wicket. But here's the thing. If you've never held a ball in your hand, you're still going to throw like it's your first time, right? You haven't learned to do it. And so there's so much value in just, okay, let me give you a little bit and now go bowl, right? I'm not going to get into advanced stuff when you haven't even applied and practiced this beginning stuff. And so that's kind of that difference in the way that the education systems work. And so I think it's why you see a lot of people from Western education systems in these roles that require a lot of critical thinking and problem solving. And it's also why when I go to the doctor in the US, most of my doctors are from China and India, right? Because there's so much, recall, and we want our doctors to know what they're doing, right? And we don't want them to have to go ask ChatGPT, gosh, I don't know what's going on, right? We want them to know. And so it turns out that the muscles that people work here are really effective in certain areas, and the muscles that the education system I came from are effective in different areas. And the difficulty, right, just like an American trying to get into do med school, is when you cross over into a different discipline. It's not that it's impossible, but it's going to be really hard. You're going to be sore that next day because that's a muscle you haven't ever worked out. It may be a muscle you didn't realize existed. And I deal with a lot of people, especially with IELTS, who are working on making that crossover. And so we talk a lot about that. And sometimes their mind gets blown, of, wait, I have to put my own thoughts in. It's like, yeah, you're not going to survive, giving answers back. You have to give original thoughts. And so different ways that can be a help or a hindrance depending on what you're doing at the time.
Right. So when you have a conversation with people here and students that come in, what are the major questions or queries that you get with regards to, not specifically about IELTS or like education, or what are the major queries that that probably you think are a bit unique?
There certainly is a tendency, and it's understandable. A lot of people come in and they're jumping into this whole idea of study abroad or permanent residency and all of this, and they there's a few different ways that people kind of process this, but it's a new process for everybody, right? If you're still living here, you've never lived abroad. A lot of people have never lived in even in a different city, and their first thought, and it's a reasonable one, is I don't want to get ripped off, right? And so they come in and they want to say, well, how much is this and how much is, and like you can imagine somebody who came in who's never even cooked food demanding to get information about how a restaurant runs. Like they don't even know what they're asking, right? They're asking very specific things about the price of a fork, and they don't understand how like location and match, like just and it's hard with these people. And I've had people that were difficult enough that I said, look, it seems like you already know what you want. I'm not sure how much we can help you. But so there's a lot of that, and there's a lot of people who are like, well, my cousin said, and it's like, well, then why are you here, right? If your cousin is a genius, by all means, take his advice and then come back to me when you figure out that it didn't work, right? I know you're here because you don't really trust your cousin, right? You probably already know that he's an idiot, and so that's why you went to go ask somebody who might actually know.
Yeah.
But don't fight with me when I tell you that's not actually true. Or people who are like, oh, I want to go to the US because I saw this movie, or I want to go to Canada because my boyfriend went there 7 years ago and he said it was easy. And so like rather than, they kind of start with an end in mind, rather than saying, hey, why are you leaving? Right? What's the whole point of leaving? And so if the point of leaving is just, we're going to try and make as much money and spend as little as possible so we can send it back. Okay, let's see it. What's the best thing for that? No, I want a really good quality of life. Okay, let's look at the best way to achieve that. And so understanding that like instead of starting kind of with your end result in mind, start with really understanding like what's our goal here, is a good idea, because a lot of the dumb things we have are people who are saying, oh, I want to go to Germany. Can you teach me German in 3 weeks? And it's like, well, no, we cannot teach you German in 3 weeks. And then we come to find out that, oh, well, because they had found out that there was some agent that could send them to Germany. It's like, well, but you can go to a lot of different schools
Sure.
and speak English. And they're like, wait, I can do what? And I'm like, see, like you're going down this whole road that doesn't even make sense.
Right.
So with the goal in mind with the real goal in mind, rather than just, oh, I want to be in this country at this place, but why?
Mm.
And it's always a big red flag if you can't tell me why.
Mm.
That's
So
not good.
is it like when you have your students coming to you, and what headspace do they come from? Is it specifically uh, to go and settle down in a country like the US, the UK, Canada, or wherever, have a good lifestyle to, say, for instance, for exposure? It could be a multitude of things. Also, when we've seen a movie a few years back and we're like, this place looks cool. I want to be there. I want to go there. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So where are they coming from exactly? What's their main purpose?
So I think there's probably three different types of people that we deal with. So one, and these tend to be the people who are leaving immediately after high school. So the first one is for the people who've just finished 12th.
Okay.
And so the reality is, for most of them, they're just looking to get away from their parents.
So
And like they've seen that, yes, you go somewhere else, and like, and I've some of the time I'm like, that like your parents don't live in Delhi, and that's much cheaper, like it's much easier. You don't have to deal with all of the visa requirements. but there's a lot of people that are looking for that freedom, and there's something to that, because when you do get into a Western culture, and like we just have different ideas about how much your family should have
Sure.
a say over your life. People have asked me before, well, what did your parents say uh, when you told them you wanted to marry somebody from another country? And I said, like, did they give their permission or whatever? And I'm like, it doesn't work this way.
Right.
If they had said you can't marry her, I would have just said, well, you're still invited to the wedding, but you don't have to go. And so for some people that are looking for more independence, going to a whole, not just them feeling that way and being far away, but being around all of their friends thinking that way. None of their friends thinking, gosh, what are my parents going to think? No, it's just, everybody wants to make your parents proud, but we're not worried that they're going to control something. It's just not a thing.
Sure.
And so, there's those people. Then with the graduate students, it's some of them are looking to kind of be set up for it, it's basically they're looking to set up the rest of their life, and some of them they're thinking towards staying abroad long term, and some are planning to come back. But
Right.
the reality is, if you can do well and survive both of these different learning systems, if you can be this recall machine while also learning to really work on new ideas and creative problem solving, like, you're pretty darn valuable. And then if you come back, even if you're making half what somebody in the US is making, that's
Right.
a lot more money here than it would
Sure.
be in the US.
Sure.
I was at a local university, and I won't say which one, but they have, they love to put out banners talking about, oh, this person went to our university, look how much money they're making. And they had this one kid who was making 2 lakhs a month living in New York City. And I thought, oh my God, this poor child. Like,
Two
how
lakhs.
is he
No,
surviving?
are we talking
Two
about
lakhs
like
a month,
two lakh,
two
two
lakhs a
lakhs a
month
month? Where in New York?
in New York City.
That's
You could
nothing.
barely pay your rent for this.
Yeah, of course.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm thinking, how is this kid eating? He hopefully he's rooming with several other guys and is okay. But that was like what I made straight out of college. But I was living in a very, very cheap part of the US. So it would be like earning twice that.
Right.
Right. And so I was like, oh my God, it would be the equivalent of having a billboard up that said, um, look, our brand new graduate is making 15,000, which is not a terrible salary, but he's making 15,000 living in downtown Mumbai. And you're like, oh my God,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Doesn't make
where is
sense.
he living?
Right.
Right. And so, um, the there are some people that are looking to stay there, and some people that are thinking, well, I can get a job at Google. Fine, I'll make half what I'm making there,
Mm.
but that money goes a lot farther here. And then you have the PR people, and those people tend to be people who have done something here, and there's something that they're frustrated with here, and they're looking to go and just a lot of the times it is, hey, I'm a more individual kind of person, and I want to go to a place where that's celebrated rather than looked down upon. And so a lot of these people, they've done it. It's not everybody who can afford to study abroad in PR. You're dealing with a pretty privileged set of people that can afford to do all this. Just the flights. You're looking at 1 lakh, and then you're looking, the whole process. If you're studying, we're talking 20 lakhs a year. Like, it's a lot of money. And
Sure.
so the vast majority of people can't afford this. So you're not dealing with everybody, right?
Right. Right.
Um, but those people who are looking at PR, usually they're people who have done it. They come from a good family, or they've been really successful in their own right. But there's something else they're looking for that they're not finding here in India. And so they tend to be the most determined people
Right.
because, number one, they know what it takes to be successful,
Sure. Sure.
and they're looking for something more.
Uh, it's been what, say 6, 7 years. You said that you've been here 6 years, 5.5, 6 years.
Five
So
and a half, yeah.
yeah. So in a small town, you say that everything is manageable more, and everything that you want is close by, and people and all of that. There's a bit of a connect in small towns. Is it something similar? And what are the 4, 5 things that you like about it, about specifically about Dehradun or a small town per se, that you could probably equate it with your hometown?
Yeah, so it's not super similar, just overall. But they say that comparison is the thief of joy. And so I
Mm.
try not to sit here and compare, where I'm from and where I am now, because then you're just frustrated all the time, right? Because
Right.
and I tell people, you have to learn to live here, because where I'm from, if you said, "Oh, I want to not have to learn to drive," okay, that's going to be a very difficult and expensive life for you, because the nearest bus stop to my parents' house is 15 kilometers away. And
Oh,
so the idea that you're not going to learn to drive, I hope you like being at home then, because you're not going anywhere. And a
sure.
private driver in the US, you're looking at maybe 50 to 60,000 a year.
Okay.
Right. So, yeah, so maybe 45 lakhs a year minimum. So it's a lot. It's just not something people have as private drivers or house staff. Americans don't have this. And so, uh, you know, rather than, uh, rather than comparing, what I always encourage, our foreigners, because we have a lot of foreigners who study Hindi with us, I always tell them, like, you need to find what's special about this place, because you left a place that was special. And I know this because I left a place that was not special, but it's special to me,
Sure.
right? Texans are famous for being very proud of where we're from, even though, like, it's not that special, but
Yeah.
we are proud, right? And so, I tell people, you need to find what's special here, because you left a special place. And if you can't find what's special here, you're going to spend all your time here
Mm.
as a sacrifice, missing something that you left behind. And you need to find something here that you'll miss when you go, right?
Sure.
And so for us, we just moved. I'm just moved so that I could have an even better view of the mountains. Man, I was
Okay.
like 15 years old before I saw mountains. That's not a thing where I'm from. And
Sure.
I've had people say, "Oh, well, do y'all have anything like this in Texas?" Dude, there's nothing like the Himalayas anywhere else in the world. There's just the Himalayas. It's the biggest mountains in the world. And so, for me, it's a huge privilege to wake up and, like, be in the shadow of the Himalayas every morning. I love my Royal Enfield. I love the fact that I can ride it to work every day.
Yeah.
Man, where I'm from, motorcycles or bikes, sorry, it's a toy, right? You don't
Right.
have a bike or a car. You have a car. You must have a car.
Yeah.
And then you get a bike as something to ride 5 or 6 weekends in a year.
Right.
And here it's like, no, I ride my toy to the office every day. I love it. We have a car for monsoon season, basically, but,
Right.
like, I ride my bike and I love it. And so, there's that. I tell people, man, read Ruskin Bond.
Right.
Ruskin Bond talks about this area the way that a Texan talks about Texas. He
Right.
will find Dehradun is a nothing town with nothing going on, and Ruskin Bond can tell you why that's beautiful. And I
Right.
love that. And oh well, Landor, whatever happened in Landor, nothing. Let me tell you why that's amazing, right? And so he has this love for the area that I can't get enough of,
Mm.
because one of the things I struggle with here is, and it can be a struggle for foreigners coming here, is that Indians don't always talk very highly about where they're from.
Right.
When you ask somebody here, why, and they say, "Oh, well, it's cleaner than Delhi," and it's like, well, literally every other city is cleaner than Delhi. It's the most polluted city in the world. But, like, why are you happy to live here? And a lot of people, they can't put their finger on it. Whereas, I think that's really important for somebody coming here, because, man, I wasn't born here. I
What's
do
it for
know
you?
other places.
What's it for you specifically?
Man, for me, it's the mountains. I take my dog hiking every morning. It's riding two-wheelers. Man, I was watching a travel show one day, and my wife woke up, and we do this sometimes on a Saturday. She was like, "You want to go?" And I said, "Yes." And so sometimes she'll just ride with me. Sometimes she has a little Vespa and she'll ride on her own. And so we just decided to ride up through the mountains. And I got back and I turned on a little travel show again, and there was two guys on bikes, and they were riding through the mountains, and I was like, where I just came from was prettier than this, right? And so, like, like, we have some world class things here, and like, it does take a little bit of effort to get up and
Are
see
you
it,
aware? Are you
but to
aware of
me,
the
it's
winter
absolutely worth
skyline?
it. Yes, I've heard about the winter line. Yeah.
Yeah. So apparently there are only two places on the planet where you have one in Switzerland and one in Missouri. So it's beautiful.
Hmm.
So a lot of people, in fact, a lot of people from Dehradun are not too aware of it. So that's that.
Hmm.
I mean, these are very small things because I was having this conversation with a very close friend of mine from school, and where he's in Bangalore, and we were just talking about how we need to be appreciative of the fact that we come from a place like Dehradun, and hits the sweet spot. It's not a big town, it's not a small town, it's somewhere in the middle. And and when you're growing up, you don't say value certain things, and you're not too appreciative of the fact that you had this kind of a view when you were growing up and all of that. This sense of gratitude is in there, and that's very important. You need to have a bit more gratitude when it comes to where you're from and all of that. So that sense that food, for example, so like momos are a rage here. So are you fond of momos?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what are your hot
Definitely.
spots? Where do you usually go to have a bite, or like?
So the two places that I like to get momos from are, I don't know that there's anything exciting here because it's the place where everybody likes it. So it's Kaohsiung
Kalsan, okay.
and
Orchard.
uh no, not Orchard. So when I go to these other places, it's one of those things where I have the same problem. I've never had like real food in Delhi because
Right,
anytime I go to Delhi, I'm looking for Western food that
right,
we don't have here. So when
right,
I go to restaurants here that have Western food, I get excited. And so I want the Western food. So I
yeah,
never even try their local stuff, right? And
right.
so it's only when I go to restaurants that like, no, they don't have Western food. So I eat the local stuff. But so it's Kalsang and KC Soup Bar
Casey, right,
in
right,
Jakan.
right,
So that's kind of like the place that I like to go. And like, man, if you're watching IPL late at night, and
right,
that's the place to go grab some tandoori momos. Love it.
right, right. So and as far as food is concerned, how open are you to Indian cuisine per se, or like, are you good with the spices?
Yeah, so I like there's certain things I love and certain things that like I just roll my eyes. So um I have intentionally never really gotten into Indian sweets. I did the same thing in Brazil. I'm already kind of a heavier guy. I don't need to learn to love sweets
It's
here. And so it's the longer I can go without falling in love with them, the better. And so there's only a couple that I really like: gulab jamun, jalebi, besan laddu. I really like. Most other stuff, like the textures, I don't really like. And I'm not trying. I don't want suggestions. I prefer to not like them. But I think one thing that's different for me, so there's two things about Indian cuisine that I'm not a fan of. One is how much oil goes in. So like I'll tell you, my wife, we bought a bottle that was like a 500 milliliter bottle of oil, and we realized we need to use it because it's going to go bad because we've had it for 6 months. So this is how much oil we use in our cooking. So you can imagine how much of a shock it can be, some of the Indian food where they're putting cups of oil in at a time. And I've just never eaten anything like that. And so that I really struggle with how heavy a lot of those things are, which is
sure,
why a lot of people don't understand why I'm so particular, but I always go for dry stuff.
right,
And over anything that has gravy. The other thing is I've gotten to where I'm accustomed to the chili,
right,
but it doesn't do anything for me. So
right,
one of the things that can happen, so this is the case in the US too, which is like we love salt and sugar. And so there's certain things where they just got lazy and they just put a bunch of salt and sugar on and we're like, "Yeah, so wonderful." It's like, but if you don't really care about the salt and sugar, even if you get used to how much we eat, you're
right,
like, but it's not good. It's just salt and sugar,
right,
right? And so that's how I am about certain food where I'm like, okay, but it's just hot. Like there's the flavor is not nice to this, right? And so something that is well seasoned, great, love it. I love, especially like paneer. I'm really into because it's new, and I think there is a thing of if you can't get your own like Western food, if you can't find a place that really makes it well, it's much better to eat local food that's made really well than to
right,
have Western food that's made poorly, right?
right.
And so
You haven't found any places here in Do?
for Western food,
Yeah.
so there's a
Probably
couple of
something that's
places.
closer to your palate.
So the places that we end up a lot, Otium, Ama Cafe.
Okay. Yeah.
If you're into burgers, there's a place called Monkey Fist. I don't
Yeah.
even know how they make their burgers taste so good. Their burgers, like, they don't look very impressive. They're not an Instagram burger like some places make, but it's real good, man. And so that's a few of the places that, like, on my Swiggy app, it's like you have ordered here 78 times in the last year. I'm sorry, they're drilling in underneath my feet. Um, but yeah, so momos are good. I really like dosas. I know that's South Indian. The first time we saw dosas, we thought it was a joke because, you know, they're this big, and we're like,
Right.
how is one person eating this? This is ridiculous. Um, so I still think there's something cartoonish about, like, walking away with a tray and you've got this like 3 foot piece of food that you're gonna eat, and there's something fun about that for me. But yeah, I love that. I love paneer tikka, chicken tikka, all that stuff. Although my staff makes fun of me because I'm really into mixed veg, and I have this thing that, like, man, when you go to weddings, the chicken is never good, right? They're always got like a cheap chicken vendor, but the mixed veg is always on point and there's no line because everybody's in line for the non-veg. And I'm like, hit me with that mixed veg again. And so my staff always thinks it's hilarious because I'm the only, like, they're like, but don't you eat non-veg? I'm like, yeah, but it's not like a rule that I must eat chicken every, like, if I prefer the veg, I prefer the veg. It's fine.
Sure.
So I really like mixed veg too.
Great. Is there anything that you would want folks to know, where they could probably get in touch with you, or how to reach out to you, and you want to plug in something? Please go right ahead.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, Foreigner in Dune. If you just put foreigner in, if you're in Dehradun, you're probably going to find me. And Heritage Institute of Languages, we teach English, we teach foreign languages, and we teach IELTS preparation. And if you know anybody who needs Hindi, we do that too. We are very our classes are very active, very interactive. You do not sit in the back. I always tell people, man, if you could learn in a class of 50, which is how most schools work, because most schools, they just try to do it as cheaply as possible, right? Which is great for the Indian market. People will buy anything if it's cheap. It doesn't matter if it immediately goes in the trash.
Right.
So the if you can, they'll do these classes, and it's like 1,000, 2,000 a month. And it's like, well, you're in there with 45 people. Guys, if you could learn languages with 45 other people, you could learn it from YouTube. That's not how it works.
Right.
You know, I tell people, man, if that's what you're going to do, save yourself the money, go on YouTube, right? You'll figure out very quickly, can I learn this way with no teacher interaction, without having that correction, without practice, right? Because when Virat Kohli is working on his swing, right, he's not watching a video.
Right.
He's swinging and there's a coach watching, right? And so, like, that's what we do. It is, most of our classes are one-on-one, two-on-one, very extremely interactive. We actually have a concept called TTT, which is teacher talking time, and our teachers should be talking less than 40% of the class. Because just like we want you metaphorically in the nets, we want to see you actually using the things that we're talking about. That's far more important than us talking at you the whole time. Everything we do is in the target language. So you get that kind of immersion as well. And then we do, yeah, IELTS. I love teaching IELTS. I don't really do many private classes anymore. I have too many people who want, but I still have a maximum of 6 in each batch, because I want to be able to have that one-on-one feedback with each of my students that I can't do when we've got 15, 20 people.
Right. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure. I hope you had a great time.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Thank you so much. Thank you for taking out time.